one more thing about when government makes the selection, government chooses winners and losers. Heaven's sakes, that's how we got into this crisis in the first place. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac were ordered by Congress and by the President, and let me be candid, by President Bush as well as President Clinton, to go out there and make loans that were not commercially viable loans. And then those loans were packaged together and they had the stamp of approval by Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae, and they were bundled up in complex derivatives which were bought by investment banks, including the Bank of Iceland, which is apparently no longer alive, and the consequence was the meltdown. Don't trust the government to select where growth is going to happen. You know what will happen if you do? It'll be the industry in the district represented by the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee. That's what it will be. So I couldn't have a clearer example of how government chooses than to look at how we got into this crisis in the first place. That's my point.
Thank you. Mr. DeVore, you have
I was delighted to hear Tom Campbell bring up Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and the bailout. And the reason why I'm delighted is that that's one of our rare areas of disagreement. Because Barbara Boxer, Carly Fiorina, and Tom Campbell all agreed that we ought to have a bailout of Wall Street. Now, I wrote before the vote that the bailout of Wall Street would increase moral hazard by allowing some people to make money and transfer the risk to other people. Look to the left and right, you are that other people. And I specifically wrote before the vote that unless we reform Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, that we wouldn't be dealing with the fundamental problem. So ladies and gentlemen, there is one clear area of distinction. Now, the congressional ombudsman, the watchdog appointed by Congress to report back on the bailout, reported back 6 weeks ago and said that the financial risk to America is greater today because we passed the bailout.
Yes,
right.
Yep.
Yes.
Tom. In light of that, you just asked the next question just in terms of the bailout. Obviously, you don't think it was wise. What was most wrong with what we did, and what should we do to correct it?
I begin by correcting my good friend. So I did not support the bailout, and I've been consistent in saying that that does create moral hazard. There is a role for the Federal Reserve to infuse liquidity when you have a crisis, and that they did. And I don't quarrel with the Federal Reserve, but I did strongly quarrel with the notion of our taxpayer dollars going to what became the bailout. And now that the money's coming back, the TARP money's coming back, the President has proposed that we spend it. No, you don't spend it. It was appropriated from us, the taxpayers, for a specific purpose. And that specific purpose was to take the toxic assets off the books of the balance sheets of the banks so that they would lend again. As the money comes back, that should be available for the President to spend again? No way. No way. So with respect, the disagreement between us is not as great unless my good friend believes that there's no role for the Federal Reserve as the lender of last resort in a financial crisis. And I think that that is a quite different thing. The Federal Reserve role is now being reconsidered from the point of view of when do they pull the lever the other way. When do they pull the lever the other way? And they are right now discussing we can't continue flooding money into the system forever. I did a calculation of how much money they put into the system, and that calculation from a year and a half ago is an increase in the money supply of over 32%. That means that unless they pull out 32%, we've got a 32% tailwind pushing towards inflation. You cannot increase the money supply that much and not have it show up in inflation. A very simple example, if I were to say the Federal Reserve is doubling your money, bring in a $10 bill and they'll give you a 20, what'll happen to prices the next day? They'll double. So also 32%'s got to show up in inflation. That's the danger of the size of the printing money that we encourage.
Thank you. Mr. DeVore?
I think it's important, again, to get the record straight. Perhaps I misheard this. I don't think I did. Tom Campbell, on an interview with David Frum, the Frum Forum, was asked point blank about the bailout, and his response on the Frum Forum, you can look it up, is he basically didn't see the alternative, and as a result, it was something that we needed to do. Carly Fiorina was chief economic advisor to John McCain before that vote. Chief economic advisor. Now, this is something that she's actually backed away from a couple of times, saying, well, I was one of many advisors. Well, she was proud to say she was the chief economic advisor during the campaign. And you have to wonder, was she the advisor that told Senator McCain to suspend his campaign and go back to Washington and cast his lot with Barack Obama and President Bush on a bill that ultimately led to the nationalization of 2/3 of the American automobile manufacturing industry because it was so loosely written, so broadly written because of the panic in Washington, D.C.? Ladies and gentlemen, the bailout happened because of marketplace distortions put into place by your government in the first place. Yes. And the more you try to put Band-Aids on it, the more you generate unintended consequences that spin the economy even more out of control. I oppose the bailout because I oppose moral hazard, where you get to assume the risk of other people making money and bonuses and fees off lending that they don't care about because you're backing them up as the taxpayers. That process has not been fixed. Your president, our president, put $400 billion of additional liquidity into Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac last year. You know when he did it? Christmas Eve, when you weren't paying attention. Ladies and gentlemen, we are in serious difficulty, and we need to apply some discipline, we need to apply some prudence and hard work, and personal responsibility. If you make the risk, you need to take the consequences.
And another good example of that is the jerry-rigged bankruptcy of government motors. So apparently because of the influence of those who wanted to preserve the labor union contracts, which would otherwise have been renegotiated or voided in bankruptcy, you and I as taxpayers paid a bailout to keep General Motors from the traditional bankruptcy. Or the bailout for AIG. What were we doing, paying the folks at AIG 100 cents on the dollar so they could pay the creditors to AIG 100 cents on the dollar? The result is the risk becomes minimized, and so you take more of it. The beauty of the free market system, and what I learned from Milton Friedman, God rest his soul, is the opportunity to gain and the responsibility to lose. Not that the government will pick up the responsibility if you lose.
Thank you.
Well, again, I think the bailout and its aftermath really goes to the heart of what you believe the role of government is. And if you believe that the role of government is to eliminate all risk in life, as you see with these ridiculous bills in Sacramento that, for example, would mandate the wearing of ski helmets on ski slopes. You know, I'm kind of thinking the next step is they're going to have a bill to wrap us in bubble wrap as we go down the slopes. Because that's the way they think, that we have to be protected from all of the consequences of our decisions, whether they're made with the risks in mind or whether they're made foolishly. And the problem with that is as you continue to grow government, the sphere of liberty will continue to shrink. And what is the purpose of government? Our founders spelled it out very clearly in the preamble of the Declaration of Independence, that the purpose of government is to secure our unalienable rights, not to protect us from our own stupidity and greed.
Areas I want to get into, but this particular question I think is important because it seems that this is up next on the agenda from Washington concerning immigration, primarily illegal aliens. The question of what would you do with the people who are already here, but in line with the fact, my more specific question is how would you deal with the violence raised by illegals in this country? And also that on March 22nd, DHS had an alert to law enforcement officials in Texas because they believe they are targets of retaliatory attacks by the Barrio Azteca paramilitary gang. It's a very serious question, and it's part of the whole immigration issue. So what do we do about this violence on the border? And because we got out of order there